We're now going to look at problem E-23, and this is on page 233 in your textbook. In this particular problem, and I should just scroll down so we get to the right problem. Here, this one is a little bit different because in the other problems we looked at, we had to calculate the allocation rate, but in this particular problem, you're actually given this in the table. So it's in the first table in the problem. So you're given the allocation rate. So now what you need to do is identify what is the total quantity of each of the activities. And what you want to do is add together the total quantity for the two products, the standard and deluxe. So we are told in the problem in the second paragraph, and there's a second table rather, that the number of parts, it's going to be parts per wheel. It's 4 for the standard and 6 for the deluxe. And the total number of units they're producing for each of these products is 1,000. So it's 4 times 1,000 plus 6 times 1,000, and that is the total number of parts that you have here for materials handling. It's 10,000 parts. Machine setups, again, you're going to look at the total number of setups. So in the second table, it's 15 for each of the products. And so that means we have a total of 30 setups. And of course, the rate you're given, 300. So 30 times 300, $9,000 for setups. Insertion of parts. So we've already just calculated the number of parts. So it's 10,000. Times your $24 per part, $240,000. Finishing, again, here you are given the information in the problem. So it's you're looking at 1 hour per wheel for the standard. So this is for standard. And it's taking 2.5 hours per wheel for the deluxe. So this is deluxe. So this is $1,000, 2,500 equals 3,500 times your allocation rate will give you 175,000. So here what we've done is we've taken our total overhead for the company and we have broken it down into the 3 main activities, which is materials handling, machine setups, insertion of parts, and finishing. Now, these particular activities are unique to this company. So just, you don't always have to have the same descriptions. It's not always materials and setups and insertion of parts. So it's up to the company to describe the types of activity that actually comprise their overhead. Okay, so that completes requirement 1. So the requirement 2 for this problem is to compute the manufacturing overhead per wheel for each model. So what we're doing here, and we'll just scroll down. So we know what the rate is. We're given that. We're given the quantity of materials handling for each of the products. So now what we're doing is just a matter of saying, so 4 times 375 is 15, 4 times 375, 2250. Here, the machine setups, so we need to get this down to a per wheel basis. So we know we have 15 setups in total for each wheel, so you're given that in the table in the problem. So what we want to do is it's 15 setups, 4,000 wheels, but we need to know how much per wheel. So where's 15 divided by 1,000, 0.015 per wheel. So that's where that's coming from. So 300 times your 0.015, 450 for each one. Insertion of parts, again, it's $24 per part, and we're told it's $4 and $6 respectively for standard and deluxe. And finishing, the rate, $50, and again, we're given in the problem that it's 1 hour for standard and 2.5 for deluxe, and you're just multiplying these out accordingly. So now you can see how you have assigned your overhead to each of these products based on each product's usage of the various activities. So with the insertion of parts, for example, they have 6 in deluxe versus standard, and of course that's leading to a higher cost, which makes sense. So that completes requirement 2 for this problem. So the next one we're going to look at requirement 3, and for that one we're asked to compute the traditional plant-wide rate, so the non-activity based costing, just using one rate for everything. What would the picture look like in that situation? So here we've already calculated in requirement 1 the total manufacturing overhead. And what we're looking at here, if you're just going to base this on the number of labor hours, direct labor hours, you're looking at the combined number of hours for both products combined is $5,000. So we take your 461 divided by the 5,000, and you're coming up with a rate of $92.30 per direct labor hour. So what you're saying here is for every hour each product is using in labor, you're going to add $92.30 to that cost. So when you look at the cost assigned, then in overhead to each of the wheels, for the standard, it's 2 times your 92, and deluxe 3 times 92.3. Okay, so these are the rates of overhead you would see charged if you were using the one rate for all your overhead activities. So now just think back to what we just calculated under activity-based costing and just compare. So under activity-based costing, we charged $165.50 to the standard wheel, and to the deluxe wheel we charged $296 to the deluxe. So the implication of this is with activity-based costing it's more accurate. So what we've done here is if we were using traditional costing, we would actually overcharge the cost of that particular product. So we would think the costs are higher than they really are. So if your costs are overstated and you're basing your selling price based on costs, then you could end up charging too much for your product, and that could result in lower sales. People may not be willing to pay that higher price. Conversely, with the traditional overhead predetermined using the one predetermined rate, you would end up with overhead of $276 for your deluxe wheel, when in fact the real overhead is $20 more, $296. So again, what you'd end up doing here, if you were using your traditional cost as a way to develop your price for your product, you would be undercosting the product, and then you would not be charging enough for your product, and you could wind up losing money. So that's why it's important to consider using activity-based costing. Now that being said, when you've done this calculation, if you ended up with very little difference in the overhead under each of these methods, then it wouldn't be worth doing. You always have to remember when you're doing additional calculations, of course there's an administrative cost to that. We're paying some St. Mary's University graduate high salary to do these calculations, so with the activity-based costing there's more calculations, so it's going to cost more money. So you always have to make sure that the cost of getting the additional accuracy and getting the additional data together for activity-based costing is actually worth it. So if these had been like a couple of dollars in the difference between the two methods, you wouldn't go to that trouble of doing that complex calculation. Okay, so that concludes requirement 3, and that is the last requirement for this problem.